This is Derrick Broze with Activist Post and the Conscious Resistance Network. I'm here in Philadelphia at the Free Your Mind conference talking with Mark Passio. How are you doing, brother?
Thank you.
So before we get into the deeper questions I want to ask you, and I know a lot of people are looking forward to, for the audience who might not be familiar with your work, just a brief background. I know you told the story hundreds of times, but about who you are and how you got into this kind of research.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Derrick. My name is Mark Passio. My website is whatonearthishappening.com. I'm an independent researcher, a public speaker, radio talk show host, and activist here in Philadelphia. We're at the Free Your Mind 4 conference right now. This is a conference I helped to co-found and organize. And I just finished giving my presentation here, and we just finished with a panel discussion called The Gathering of the Minds. It's been a great event so far. Probably will be no exception tomorrow on the third and final day of the conference. My background in these topics, in which I discuss human consciousness, the methodologies of mind control that are waged against the public, and specifically the occult as a belief system and as a collection of hidden knowledge and hidden information that is deliberately withheld from humanity to create a power differential by the ruling class. I got involved in it many, many years ago through direct involvement with dark occultism. I grew up in a traditional kind of religious type background, not an extremely strict religious family, but a family that didn't really question the status quo or question authority in any way, and just repeated, religious indoctrination that they had been given down to the next generations, including myself. And I started questioning all that at a young age, and then recognized that it was a system of control that wasn't really pushing anyone to look into the truth or discover things for themselves or question anything. And that kind of instilled a lot of anger in me, because I felt it was an effort that was basically indoctrinating me into a system of control. And I reacted with a lot of anger at that time and hatred. Because I lacked a lot of knowledge about what religion really was about, and I lacked knowledge of astrotheology, I lacked knowledge of occultism in general. And what all that kind of anger led to for me was trying to seek out the opposite of the indoctrinated religious beliefs that I had been given as a child. That led me into dark occultism, and in particular the ideology known as Satanism. So I gravitated towards something known as LaVey Satanism back then, and it's essentially got 4 main principles or tenets. The first is selfishness is the highest aspiration for a human being, and we should be concerned with our own advancement and betterment, even if it harms someone else. So this is rampant selfishness. It's not self-interest from any kind of a spiritual perspective, but it is selfishness that is out of control and way out of balance. The second tenet is moral relativism, which is the idea that there's not really any such a thing as the difference objectively between right and wrong behavior, and these things could be arbitrarily decided based on our likes, whims, and preferences. The third tenet of this religion that I gravitated to is social Darwinism, which is an extension of biological Darwinism, that basically postulates that the ruling class earned the right to be in their position of rulership over other people because their genes got them there. And that naturally extends to the fourth and final tenet, which is kind of like, the logical extension, if you will, of this warped ideology, which is eugenics. And it's what the main topic of my talk here today was eugenics, a form of eugenics that's being waged against us. Eugenics is basically population control. It's basically breeding into society characteristics that the ruling class wants to see, and breeding out of society characteristics they don't want to see. They look at themselves as gods who get to decide who lives and who dies. And that's the ideology I gravitated toward. And what I realized very quickly when I became involved in it was Satanists are an eclectic group of people from all walks and all varieties of life, and they're involved at a very deep, fundamental, interconnected level with every social institution that humanity has. Banking, politics, law, military, law enforcement, education, media, you name it. And these people are in positions of great power and influence in all of these institutions. And then once I realized that, my conscience wouldn't allow me to proceed any further with involvement, and I became a whistleblower to try to explain to people how these people are in control and the ideology that they hold.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to explain it, because as I said, I know you've gone through explaining that plenty of times.
Sure.
And again, thank you to the work that you've done, being willing to speak out about those things and put together the Free Your Mind Conference and help it become what it has. My next question tends to more a strategic approach. Mm-hmm. A couple months back, you made a Facebook post that caused a bit of uproar as far as strategy goes. One idea that I try to put out there is that, for one, and I think you would agree with this, there's no way that things are going to change through the political systems. Everything that you just outlined is too far infected into the systems to think that there's any hope in a Donald Trump, a Bernie Sanders, a Hillary Clinton, or anybody in that system. And so typically, I say the other side of that coin is the solutions won't be found politically, but they also won't be found through violence, and instead try to promote people to build counter institutions to the state itself. And a few months ago, you made a post that seemed to maybe where your view has sort of changed on that, where it seems like I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like now your view is tending towards that people need to be willing to use violence when and if the time is necessary. Do you care to comment on that viewpoint?
I absolutely never condone any form of violence. However, there is a time when forceful physical self-defense becomes required, necessary, and essential. I think we're rapidly approaching that point. I'm not saying that I am immediately calling for forceful revolution, but I don't think the control system is going to capitulate its control willingly. And unless we can convince more people that this control system is immoral and needs to be disbanded willingly so that we can allow these new systems to be created, self-defense is going to be required as part of the solution. So I agree that we should be working toward building something better. The problem is controllers often destroy those new creations because they refuse to allow them to flourish. In that eventuality, physical defense is required.
So, I guess that's the point that I wanted to, kind of give you an opportunity to highlight, is the difference between defensive violence, defensive force, right, and just going out and prodding them and believing that somehow we're going to beat the drones, the surveillance, all these various tools. I think we could
do that as well. I'm not of the opinion that an actual military conflict between the control system and the American people would be unwinnable on the part of the American people. I know that's an unpopular attitude, and it's an unpopular statement because people abhor war and the prospect of war. War is ugly. War is hell. I'm not making any statement that I make lightly about the usage of physical force. I fully cognize what it would be like. Absolutely. However, I think we have to stop using force and violence in any way interchangeably, and never say that a revolution would be a violent revolution. A revolution against something that is immoral would involve zero violence, no matter how physically bloody it would be. Because if you're on the side of right and non-coercion, all you would ever be using in that eventuality is physical defensive force against the violence that has already been employed, and that's a natural right.
And I think what's interesting about this topic is that then we can get into ideas about, well, where do we define that force? Some people would say right now in the current moment that the system that exists is inflicting so much violence against us that we would be justified in this moment to go attack them in self-defense, and I think there's varying degrees of where we can say, okay, what exactly, at what level do we say, hey, they're attacking us, they're poisoning our air?
I would definitely like to address that question. What we're really talking about here is the concept known as, it's not a concept, it's a physical state known as duress. The question becomes, are we in a state of duress? Duress is implied violence, meaning I'm saying, or me or anyone is saying to someone else, if you do not act the way I demand that you act and behave, I will come and conduct violence against your person. The question is, are we right now living under a state of duress? And the answer, unequivocally, is yes, we are. Each individual in this society is living in a state of duress, whether they are consciously aware of it or recognize that as truth or not. People are saying, if you do not give us the amount of your resources that we arbitrarily decide are ours, and you resist that, you will have violence conducted upon you by the state. That is a state of duress. Someone says if you alter your consciousness with a substance that we deem you are not permitted to alter your consciousness, we will come and conduct violence against your physical body by taking your resources or throwing you in a cage. That is duress. That is implied violence. And then the philosophical question has to necessarily become, at what point is physical defensive force justified against a state of continued duress? I can't answer that for anyone. For me personally, it's already far beyond that line. A long, long time ago, it passed that line, and I recognized that I was living under a state of physical duress. But then it becomes a practical question. One person acting out looks like a crazy person, but a whole society saying no and being willing to back that no with fangs and venom becomes a movement.
And I absolutely agree 100%. I'm not sure if you got to hear our panel yesterday on agorism, solutions, counter-economics, but I just want to throw it to you because I know that you're an avid researcher, but if you haven't taken the time to look into it, I do believe that the ideas of agorism and creating counter-institutions to the state on every level, economics, food production, self-defense, community protection, as we lay that groundwork and as people are, like yourself, put the research out, what I believe and what Samuel Konkin, who founded the idea of the strategy of agorism, basically envisioned a 4-stage that we would go through where I think we're in probably stage 2. First of all, you start out where it's complete statism. Nobody even has an understanding of the concept of freedom or self-ownership. And slowly, through movements like this, these ideas start to spread, and these little free communities, what he calls agoras, will start to slowly kind of taint the state. But he also was wise enough to say if any community or any individual moved too quickly, the state would smash it down while they still maintain power. But we also recognize that the state is unsustainable, that the way they are conducting business is unsustainable, especially as more people begin to question it. So what he sort of envisioned is as the state collapses, and those of us who are forward-thinking enough to build the next step, we can help others. So when the shit hits the fan and people are like, okay, well, FEMA's down the street and they said they have food for my family if I go there, or they can go loot and riot and try to survive that, or they can turn to their crazy neighbors they've been seeing out there living free and building free communities. They can take seeds, they can take tools, they can take weapons and defend themselves. And so I believe that in order for us to avoid a lot of what we're seeing in the Euro crisis, where people are being reactionary and they're switching to barter networks or switching to pre-Euro currencies, those of us who see what's happening can start spreading the message of self-governance, of self-awareness, of natural law, and building these communities based on these principles. And that's my goal, my objective, and I think that your work plays a big role in that.
Absolutely. And that is totally valid and actively needs to be being done by people in their own communities to build these new systems, because the old systems are unsustainable, as you said, and we're going to witness their collapse. And that's why we want to be ready with alternatives if that eventuality does occur. I still want to emphasize that at that same time, people should be preparing in forms of defense. And that means having the ability to resist the violence of the state if necessary, especially people here in the United States. Understand the importance of firearms, own firearms, maintain a supply of firearms and ammunition. The powers that should not be in this world fear firearms and want them out of the hands of the public for a very specific reason. You could say a gun won't do anything against a drone, but you know what? The sting of 1,000 bees makes the strongest enemy flee. That's why they don't want firearms in the hands of the public. That's why they're going to keep pulling their false flags to try to tug on the heartstrings of Americans to get them to lay down their rights and take their guns away. I'm an avid personal firearms supporter and the supporter of the individual self-defensive rights, the sacred masculine principle. At the same time, we have to employ these sacred feminine principles of caring enough to build something, to create something new in society. At the same time, it's just like having a child. If you take the responsibility to bring those creations into the universe and into manifestation, you also have to be willing to protect them.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate your time, Mark. And I just want to, for those who
great questions.
I appreciate it. And
Yes.
for those who are listening, if you haven't checked out What on Earth is Happening, check out Mark's work. And I just want to throw this in with everything else that Mark has said, is that it's important for us to remember, if we're trying to create something new, we need to get out of the idea that what we want is a revolution, which implies revolving and going in circles. And I think most of us truly, when we say that, we mean evolving, moving forward, and stepping up. So it's important for us to use conscious language when we're promoting these things, because we're putting intentions out there. We say we want to revolve, we will keep going in circles. So we got to be willing to take it to the next step. And thank you for all your work, Mark.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.